Section 18 of The Man of Genius by Cesare Lombroso. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 3. The Epileptoid Nature of Genius. Etiology, Symptoms, Confessions of Men of Genius. The Life of a Great Epileptic. Napoleon, St. Paul, the Saints, Philanthropic Hysteria. We may, however, enter more deeply into the study of the phenomena of genius by the light of modern theories on epilepsy. According to the entirely harmonious researches of clinical and experimental observers, this malady resolves itself into localized irritation of the cerebral cortex, manifesting itself in attacks which are sometimes instantaneous, sometimes of a longer duration, but always intermittent and always resting on a degenerative basis, either hereditary or predisposed to irritation by alcoholic influence, by lesions of the skull, etc. In this way we catch a glimpse of another conclusion, viz., that the creative power of genius may be a form of degenerative psychosis belonging to the family of epileptic affections. The fact that genius is frequently derived from parents either addicted to drink, of advanced age, or insane certainly points to this conclusion, as also does the appearance of genius subsequently to lesions of the head. It is also indicated by frequent anomalies, especially of cranial asymmetry, the capacity of the skull being sometimes excessive, sometimes abnormally small, by the frequency of moral insanity and of hallucinations, by sexual and intellectual precocity, and not rarely by somnambulism. To these we may add the prevalence of suicide, which is on the other hand very common among epileptic patients, the intermittence of bodily and mental functions, more particularly the occurrence of amnesia and analgesia, the frequent tendency to vagabondage, religious feeling manifesting itself even in the case of atheists, as with Comte, the strange terrors by which they are often seized, W. Scott, Byron, Heller, the double personality, the multiplicity of simultaneous delusions, so common in epileptic cases, the frequent recurrence of delusions produced by the most trifling causes, the same misonism, the same relation to criminality, which finds its point of union in moral insanity, and to this the origin and ancestry of criminals and imbeciles, which constantly show traces both of genius and epilepsy, as may be seen in the genealogical charts given of the families of the Caesars and Charles V, and the strange passion for wandering and for animals, which I have often found in degenerated and especially in epileptic subjects. The distractions of mind for which great men are so famous are often, writes Tonini, nothing else but epileptic absences. The greatest proof of all, however, is that affective insensibility, that loss of moral sense, common to all men of genius, whether sane or insane, which makes of great conquerors, even in the most recent times, nothing else than brigands on a large scale. Such conclusions may seem strange to persons unacquainted with the way in which the region of epilepsy has been extended in modern times, so that many cases of headache, hemicrania, or simple loss of memory are now recognized as forms of epilepsy, though in disguise, the manifestation, as Savage has observed, causing the disappearance of every trace of the pre-existing epilepsy. It is sufficient, however, to recall to the reader the numerous men of genius of the first order who have been seized by motory epilepsy, or by that kind of morbid irritability which is well known to supply its place. Among these we find such names as Napoleon, Molière, Julius Caesar, Petrarch, Peter the Great, Mahomet, Handel, Swift, Recalou, Charles V, Flaubert, Dostoevsky, and St. Paul. To those acquainted with the so-called binomial or serial law, according to which no phenomenon occurs singly, each one being, on the contrary, the expression of a series of less well-defined but alleged facts, such frequent occurrence of epilepsy among the most distinguished of distinguished men can but indicate a greater prevalence of this disease among men of genius than was previously thought possible, and suggests a hypothesis of the epileptoid nature of genius itself. In this connection, it is important to note how, in these men, the convulsive made its appearance but rarely in the course of their lives. Now it is well known that, in such cases, the psychic equivalent, here the exercise of creative power, is more frequent and intense. But above all, the identity is proved to us by the analogy of the epileptic seizure with the moment of inspiration. This active and violent unconsciousness in the one case manifests itself by creation and the other by motory agitation. The demonstration is completed when we come to analyze this creative inspiration or stress, which is often suggested epilepsy, even to those ignorant of the recent discoveries with regard to its nature, and this, not only on account of its frequent association with insensibility to pain, with the regularity of the pulse, and with an unconsciousness which is often that of a somnambulist, of its instantaneous occurrence and determinate character, but also because it is not seldom accompanied by convulsive movements of the limbs, followed by amnesia, and provoked by substances or conditions which cause or increase the excessive flow of blood to the brain, or by powerful sensations, and also because it may succeed or pass into hallucinations. This resemblance between inspiration and the epileptic seizure, moreover, is demonstrated by an even directer and more cogent proof, the confessions of eminent men of genius, which show how completely the one may be confounded with the other. Such confessions are those of Goncourt and Buffon, and especially Mahomet and Dostoevsky. There are moments, writes the latter in Betsy, that it is only a matter of 5 or 6 seconds when you suddenly feel the presence of the internal harmony. This phenomenon is neither terrestrial nor celestial, but it is an indescribable something which man in his mortal body can scarcely endure. He must either undergo a physical transformation or die. It is a clear, indisputable feeling all at once. You feel as though you were placed in contact with the whole of nature, and you say, "Yes, this is true." When God created the world, he said, at the end of every day of creation, "Yes, this is true, this is good." And it is not tenderness, nor yet joy. You do not forgive anything, because there is nothing to forgive. Neither do you love. Oh, this feeling is higher than love. The terrible feeling is the frightful clearness with which it manifests itself, and the rapture with which it fills you. If this state were to last more than 5 seconds, the soul could not endure it, and would have to disappear. During those 5 seconds, I live a whole human existence, and for that I would give my whole life, and not think I was paying it too dearly. Are you an epileptic? No. You will become so. I have heard that it begins just in that way. A man subject to this malady has minutely described to me the sensation which precedes the attack, and in listening to you, I thought I heard him speaking. He too spoke of a period of 5 seconds, and said it was impossible to endure this condition longer. Remember Mahomet's water jar? For the space of time it took to empty it, the Prophet was wrapped into paradise. Your 5 seconds are the jar, paradise is your harmony, and Mahomet was epileptic. Take care you do not become so also. Kirillov. And in The Idiot, Volume 1, page 296. I remember, among other things, a phenomenon which used to precede his epileptic attacks, when they came on in a waking state, in the midst of the dejection, the mental marasmus, the anxiety which the madman experienced. There were moments in which, all of a sudden, his brain became inflamed, and all his vital forces suddenly rose to a prodigious degree of intensity. The sensation of life, the conscious existence, was multiplied almost tenfold in these swiftly passing moments. A strange light illuminated his heart and mind. All agitation was calmed, all doubt and perplexity resolved itself into a superior harmony, a serene and tranquil gaiety which yet was completely rational. But these radiant moments were only a prelude to the last incident that immediately succeeded by the attack. That instant was, in truth, ineffable. When at a later time, after his recovery, the prince reflected on this subject, he said to himself, those fleeting moments in which our highest consciousness of ourselves, and therefore our highest life, is manifested, are due only to disease, to the suspension of normal conditions, and if so, it is not a higher life, but on the contrary, of a lower order. This, however, did not prevent his reaching a most paradoxical conclusion. What matter, after all, there would be a disease, abnormal tension, if the result, as I, with recovered health, remember and analyze it, includes the very highest degree of harmony and beauty? If at this moment I have an unspeakable, hitherto unsuspected feeling of harmony, of peace, of my whole nature being fused in the impetus of prayer with the highest synthesis of life. This farrago of nonsense seemed to the prince perfectly comprehensible, and the only fault it had in his eyes was that of being too feeble a rendering of his thoughts. He could not doubt, or even admit the possibility of doubt, of the real existence of this condition of beauty and prayer, or of its constituting the highest synthesis of life. But did he not in these moments experience visions analogous to the fantastic and debasing dreams produced by the intoxication of opium, hashish, or wine? He was able to form a sane judgment on this point when the morbid condition had ceased. These moments were only distinguished, to define them in a word, by the extraordinary heightening of the inward sense, even in that instant, that is to say, in the last moment of consciousness which precedes the attack. The patient was able to say clearly, and with full consciousness, of the import of his words. Yes, for this moment one would give a whole lifetime. There is no doubt that, as far as he alone was concerned, that moment was worth a lifetime. No doubt, too, it is to this same instant that the epileptic Muhammad alluded, when he said that he used to visit all the abodes of Allah in less time than it would take to empty his water jar. I will add here some lines from the correspondence of Flaubert. If sensitive nerves are enough to make a poet, I should be worth more than Shakespeare and Homer. I have heard through closed doors people talking in low tones 30 paces away, across whose abdomen one may see all the viscera throbbing, and who have sometimes felt, in the space of a minute, a million thoughts, images, and combinations of all kinds, throwing themselves into my brain at once, as it were the lighted squibs of fireworks. Let us now compare these descriptions of an attack, which might be called one of psychic epilepsy, and which corresponds exactly to the physiological idea of epilepsy, i.e. cortical irritation, with all the descriptions given us by authors themselves of the inspiration of genius. We should then see how perfect is the correspondence between the two sets of phenomena. In order the better to illustrate these strange displacements of functions in epileptic subjects, I shall call attention to an example, cited by Dr. Frigerio, of an epileptic patient who, at the moment of seizure, felt the venereal desire awaken, not in the generative organs, but in the epigastrium, accompanied by ejaculation. Let me add that, in certain cases, it is not only isolated paroxysms which recall the psychic phenomenology of the epileptic, but the whole life. Bulger remarks that, for the Goncourts, life reduces itself to a series of epileptic attacks, preceded and followed by a blank. And what the Goncourts wrote has always been autobiography. Zola, in his Romanciers Naturalistes, gives us the confessions of Balzac. He works under the influence of circumstances, of which the union is a mystery. He does not belong to himself. He is the plaything of a force which is eminently capricious. On some days he would not touch his brush. He would not write a line for an empire. In the evening when dreaming, in the morning when rising, in the midst of some joyous feast, it happens that a burning coal suddenly touches his brain. These hands, this tongue, a word awakens ideas that are born, grow, ferment. Such is the artist, the humble instrument of a despotic will. He obeys a master. Let us glance at the pictures which Taine has given us of the greatest of modern conquerors, and Renan of the greatest of the apostles. The principal characteristics of Napoleon's genius, says Taine, are its originality and comprehensiveness. No detail escapes him. The quality of facts which his mind stores up and retains, the number of ideas which he elaborates and utters, seem to surpass human capacity. In the art of ruling men his genius was supreme. His method of procedure, which is that of the experimental sciences, consisted in controlling every theory by a precise application observed under definite conditions. All his sayings are fire flashes. Adultery, said he to the Conseil d'Etat, when the question of divorce was under discussion, is not exceptional, it is very common. Si est une affaire de canapé. Liberty, he exclaimed, on another occasion, and he remained faithful all his life to the spirit of this exclamation, is a necessity of a small and privileged class, endowed by nature with faculties higher than those of the mass of mankind. It may therefore be abridged with impunity. Equality, on the contrary, pleases the multitude. He possesses a faculty which carries us back to the Middle Ages, an astounding constructive imagination. What he accomplished is surprising, but he undertook far more, and dreamed much more even than that. However vigorous his practical faculties may have been, his poetic faculty was still stronger. It was even greater than it ought to have been in a statesman. We see greatness in him exaggerated into immensity, and immensity degenerated into madness. What aspiring monstrous conceptions revolved, accumulated, supersede each other in that marvellous brain. Europe, he said, is a molehill. There have never been great empires or great revolutions save at the East, where there are 600 millions of men. In Egypt he was thinking of conquering Syria, re-establishing the Eastern Empire at Constantinople, and returned to Paris by way of Adrianople and Vienna. The East allured him with the mirage of omnipotence. In the East he caught a glimpse of the possibility that, a new Mohammed, he might found a new religion. Confined to Europe, His dream was to recreate the Empire of Charlemagne, to make Paris the physical, intellectual, and religious capital of Europe, and assemble within its precincts the princes, kings, and popes, who should have become his vassals. By way of Russia, he would then advance towards the Ganges and the supremacy of India. The artist enclosed within the politician, as issued from his sheath, he creates in the religion of the ideal and the impossible. We know him for what he is, a posthumous brother of Dante and Michelangelo. Only these two worked on paper and in marble. It was a living man, sensitive and suffering flesh, that formed his material. Napoleon differs from the modern men in character, as much do the contemporaries of Dante and Michelangelo. The sentiments, habits, and morality professed by him are the sentiments, habits, and morality of the 15th century. "I am not a man like other men," he exclaimed. "The laws of morality and decorum are not made for me." Mais, de Staël and Stendhal compared Napoleon psychologically to the lesser tyrants of the 14th century, Sforza and Castracani. Such, in fact, he was. On the evening of the 12th Vendemiaire, being present at the preparations made by the sections, he said to Junot, "Ah, if the sections would only place me at their head, I would answer for it that they should be in the Tuileries within 2 hours, then all these wretched conventionalists out of it." 5 hours later, being called to the assistance of Barras and the Convention, he opened fire on the Parisians, like a good condottiere, who does not give, but lends himself to the first who offers, to the highest bidder, reserving for himself full liberty of action and the power of seizing everything should the occasion present itself. Never even among the Bordias and Malatestas was there a more sensitive and impulsive brain, capable of such electric accumulations and discharges. In him no idea remained purely speculative. Each one, as it occurred, had a tendency to embody itself in action, and would have done so if not prevented by force. Sometimes the outburst was so sudden that restraint did not come in time. One day in Egypt he upset a decanter of water over a lady's dress, and taking her into his own room on the pretext of remedying the accident, remained there with her for some time, too long, while the other guests, seated around the table, waited, gazing at each other. On another occasion he threw Prince Louis violently out of the room. On yet another he kicked Senator Volney in the stomach. At Campo Formino he threw down and broke a china ornament to put an end to the resistance of the Austrian plenipotentiary. At Dresden in 1813, when Prince Metternich was most necessary to him, he asked him, brutally, how much he received from England for defending her interests. Never was there a more impatient sensibility. He throws garments that do not fit him into the fire. His writing, when he tries to write, is a collection of disconnected and indecipherable characters. He dictates so quickly that his secretaries can scarcely follow him. If the pen is behindhand, so much the worse for it. If a volley of oaths and exclamations give it time to catch up, so much the better. His heart and intellect are full to overflowing. Under pressure like this, the extempore orator and the excited controversialist take the place of the statesman. "My nerves are irritable," he said of himself, and in fact the tension of accumulated impressions sometimes produced a physical convulsion. He was not seldom seen to shed tears under strong emotion. Napoleon wept, not on account of true and deep feeling, but because a word, an idea by itself, is a stimulus which reaches the inmost depth of his nature. Hence certain distractions, consequent upon vomitings or fainting fits, which caused, it is said, the loss of General Verdemagne's corpse after the battle of Dresden. Though the regular is so powerful, the balance of the works is, from time to time, in danger of being deranged. An enormous degree of strength was necessary to coordinate, to guide, and to dominate passions of such vitality. In Napoleon, this strength is an instinct of extraordinary force and harshness, an egoism, not inert, but active and aggressive, and so far developed as to set up in the midst of human society a colossal I, which can tolerate no life that is not an appendix or instrument of its own. Even as a child, he showed the germs of this personality. He was impatient of all restraint, and had no trace of conscience. He could brook no rivals, beat those who refused to render homage to him, and accuse his victims of having beaten him. He looks upon the world as a great banquet, open to every comer, but where, to be well served, it is necessary for a man to have long arms, help himself first, and let others take what he leaves. One has a hold over man through his selfish passions, fear, greed, sensuality, self-esteem, emulation. If there are some hard particles in the heap, all one has to do is to crush them. such was the final conception arrived at by Napoleon, and nothing could induce him to change it, because this conception is conditioned by his character. He saw man as he needed to see him. His egoism is reflected in his ambition, so much a part of his inmost nature that he cannot distinguish it from himself. It makes his head swim. France is a mistress who is his to enjoy. In the exercise of his power, he acknowledges neither intermediaries, nor rivals, nor limits, nor hindrances. To fill his office with zeal and success, it is not enough for him, above and beyond the functionary. He vindicates the rights of the man. All who serve him must extinguish the critical sense in themselves. Their scarcely audible whispers are a conspiracy, or an attack on his majesty. He requires of them anything and everything, from the manufacture of false Austrian and Russian banknotes in 1809 to 1812, to the preparation of an infernal machine to blow up the Bourbons in 1814. He knows nothing of gratitude. When a man is of no further use to him as a tool, he throws him away. During a dance, he would walk about among the ladies, in order to shock them with unpleasant witticisms. He was always prying into their private life, and related to the Empress herself the favours which, more or less spontaneously, they granted him. While still stranger, he carried the same methods of proceeding into his relations with sovereigns and ambassadors of foreign states. In his correspondence, his proclamations, his audiences, he provoked, threatened, challenged, offended. He divulged their real or supposed amorous intrigues. The bulletins 9, 17, 18, 19, after the Battle of Jena, evidently accused the Queen of Prussia of having had an intrigue with the Emperor Alexander, and reproaches them with a personal insult to himself in the employment of such or such a man. He requires them, in short, to modify their functional laws. He is but a poor opinion of a government without the power of prohibiting things which may displease foreign governments. This is the completest view of Napoleon ever given by any historian. To anyone acquainted with the psychological constitution of the epileptic, it becomes clear that Taine has here given us the subtlest and precisest pathological diagnosis of a case of psychic epilepsy, with its gigantic megalomaniacal illusions, its impulses, and complete absence of moral sense. It is not, therefore, only in moments of inspiration that genius approaches epilepsy, and the same thing may be said of St. Paul. St. Paul was of low stature, but stoutly made. His health was always poor, on account of a strange infirmity which he calls a thorn in the flesh, and which was probably a serious neurosis. His moral character was anomalous. Naturally kind and courteous, he became ferocious when excited by passion. In the school of Gamaliel, a moderate Pharisee, he did not learn moderation. As the enthusiastic leader of the young Pharisees, he was among the fiercest persecutors of the Christians. Hearing that there was a certain number of disciples at Damascus, he demanded the high priest a warrant for arresting them, and left Jerusalem in a disturbed state of mind. On approaching the plain of Damascus at noon, he had a seizure, evidently of an epileptic nature, in which he fell to the ground unconscious. Soon after this, he experienced a hallucination, and saw Jesus himself, who said to him in Hebrew, "Paul, Paul, why persecutest thou me?" For 3 days seized with fever, he neither ate nor drank, and saw the phantom of Ananias, whom, as head of the Christian community, he had come to arrest, making signs to him. The latter was summoned to his bed, and calm immediately returned to the spirit of Paul, who from that day forward became one of the most fervent Christians. Without desiring any more special instruction, as having received a direct revelation from Christ himself, he regarded himself as one of the apostles, and acted as such, to the enormous advantage of the Christians. The immense dangers occasioned by this haughty and arrogant spirit were compensated 1,000 times over by his boldness and originality, which would not allow the Christian idea to remain within the bounds of a small association of people poor in spirit, who would have let it die out like Hellenism, but, so to speak, steered boldly out to sea with it. In Antioch he had an hallucination similar to that of Mahomet at a later period. He felt himself rapt into the third heaven, where he heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Anomalies are also observed in his writings. He lets himself be guided by words rather than ideas. Some one word which he has in his mind overpowers him and draws him off into a series of ideas very far removed from his main subject. His digresses are abrupt. The development of his ideas is suddenly cut short. His sentences are often unfinished. No writer was ever so unequal. No literature in the world presents a sublime passage like 1 Corinthians 13, side by side with futile arguments and wearisome detail. Epilepsy in men of genius, therefore, is not an accidental phenomenon, but a true morbus totius substantiae, to express it in medical language. Hence we gather a fresh indication of the epileptoid nature of genius. If it seems certain Dostoevsky described himself in The Idiot, we have another example of an epileptic genius, whose whole course of life is determined by the psychology peculiar to the epileptic. Impulsivity, double personality, childishness, which goes back even to the earliest periods of human life, and alternates with the prophetic penetration and with morbid altruism and the exaggerated affectivity of the saint. This last fact is more important as bearing on the objection that the usual immorality of the epileptic would forbid us to connect this type with that of the saintly character. This objection, however, can be partially eliminated by the researchers Bianchi, Tonini, Filippi, according to whom there are cases, though rare, 16%, of epileptic patients of good character, whose even manifest an exaggerated altruism, though accompanied by excessive emotionism. Hysteria, which is closely related to epilepsy and similarly connected with the loss of affectivity, often shows us, side by side with an exaggerated egoism, certain bursts of excessive altruism, which at the same time have their source in and depend on a degree of moral insanity, and shows us the morbid phenomenon in excessive charity. There are some ladies, justly observed le grand au sol, who, though remaining in the world, take an ostentatious part in all the good works going on in their parish. They collect for the poor, work for the orphans, visit the sick, give alms, watch the dead, ardently solicit the benevolence of others, and do a great deal of really helpful work, while at the same time neglecting their husbands, children, and household affairs. These women ostentatiously and noisily proclaim their benevolence. They set on foot a work of charity with as much ardour as bogus company promoters launch a financial enterprise which is a result of hyperbolical dividends. They go and come in constantly increasing numbers. They instinctively act with a charming tact and delicacy, think of everything necessary to be done, whether in the midst of private mourning or public catastrophe, and affect to blush on receiving tribunes of admiration from grateful sufferers or deeply moved spectators. Their ready tact and sympathy are surprising, and the greater the trouble, the more admirably do they seem to rise to the occasion, while the paroxysm lasts. When their feelings are calmed, the benevolent impulse passes away. Being essentially mobile and spasmodic, they cannot do good deliberately and on reflection. The charitable hysteric is capable of achieving feats of courage, which have been quoted and repeated and even become legendary. They have been known to show extraordinary presence of mind, resource, and courage in saving the inmates of a burning house, or in facing an armed mob during a riot. If questioned on the following day, these heroines will be found in a state of complete prostration, and some of them candidly avow they do not know what they have done, and were at the time unconscious of danger. At a time of cholera epidemic, when fear causes such ill-advised and reprehensible derelictions of duty, hysterical women have been known to show an extraordinary devotion. Nothing is repugnant to them. Nothing revolts their modesty or wearies out their endurance. For such persons, devotion to others has become a need, a necessary expenditure of energy, and without knowing it, they pathologically play the part of virtue. People in general are taken in by it, and for the sake of example, is just as well. It was this consideration which induced me to ask and obtain a public acknowledgment of the services of a hysterical patient, and one time an inmate of a lunatic asylum, whose deeds of charity in the district where she lives are truly touching. While constantly active in attendance on the sick, and spending liberally on their behalf, she confines her personal expenditure to what is strictly necessary, her dress being the same at all seasons of the year. Now this lady shows a great variety of hysterical symptoms, becomes intensely excited on the slightest occasion, sleeps very badly, and is a serious invalid. Lastly, in private sorrows, the hysterical patient often departs from the normal manifestations of grief. At the loss of her children, she remains calm, serene, resigned, does not shed a tear, thinks everything that ought to be done, gives numerous orders, forgets none of the most painful details, imposes on all around her the most dignified attitude, and attends the funeral without breaking down. People think that this mother is exceptionally gifted, and has a courage superior to others. This is a mistake. She is weaker than they. She is suffering from disease. In order fully to grasp the seeming paradoxes contained in these conclusions, we must remember that many philanthropists love their neighbours, but only at a distance, and nearly always at the expense of the more physiological, more general affections, love for the family, their country, etc. We must remember Dostoevsky's remark in the Brothers Karamazov. 1. page 325, that what one can love in one's fellow is a hidden and invisible man. As soon as he shows his face, love disappears. One can love one's fellow men in spirit, but only at a distance, never close at hand. One also recalls Sterne, who was overcome with emotion at the sight of a dead ass, and deserted his wife and his mother. The great philanthropists, such men as Beccaria and Howard, have been harsh fathers and masters. Even the divine philanthropist was, as we have seen, hard towards his own family. St. Paul, before his conversion, distinguished himself by his vehement and cruel persecutions of the Christians. It is well known how, only too often, the man of real and fervent religion has to forget his family and make a duty of celibacy and hatred to the other sex. Thus St. Liberata was angry with her husband for weeping at parting from their children, and according to the legend, the mother of Baruch replied to her son when, during his martyrdom, he implored her for water in his anguish. Thou shouldst desire no water, now save that of heaven. These cases, moreover, show that very often exaggerated altruism is itself only a pathological phenomenon, a hypertrophy of sentiment accompanied, as always happens in cases of hypertrophy, by loss and atrophy in other directions. We have seen in Juan de Dios, in Lazaretti, Loyola, and St. Francis of Assisi, saintliness showing itself in true psychic polarization as a perfect contrast to their former life in which the tendency to evil was strongly pronounced. If we add to these phenomena, so frequent in epileptic and hysterical patients, all those others of clairvoyance, thought transference, transposition of the senses, facadism, mental vision, temporary manifestations of genius, and monoidism, so frequently observed in these maladies, phenomena so strange that many scientists, unable to explain, endeavor to deny them, we can demonstrate the hysterical character of saintliness, even its least explicable manifestations, those miracles. End of section 18.